Welcome back to the What Are You Driven By podcast. This season, in season 2, we're really exploring the challenges and the changes that shaped who people are and what drives them. So maybe you're going through a difficult time or someone you know is going through a difficult time. Our goal is that you might discover someone that went through a similar situation and can give you the strength or insight to help you make it through. So make sure you subscribe to the What Are You Driven By podcast and connect with us online at Driven by Co. Now, on this episode, our guest is Shallima Maharaj, reporter and anchor for Global News. Shallima, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. You said the professional part of it, the personal part of it is, I am a 30-something journalist who has been working for a very long time in the Canadian media landscape. And I've lived all across the country. Actually met my husband out in Western Canada. And I have been fortunate enough to say that I am pretty much living out the dream that I set out to accomplish when I was a little girl. And I am the proud mother of two fur babies. So definitely very, very happy with my little ones, two English bulldogs. We have our great little family. We live in the north end of Toronto, and it's been really wonderful and lovely to be back home. I've been back home actually now for almost 7 years because I was working, like I mentioned, out in Western Canada for so many of my more formative years reporting professionally. So it's been awesome to be back in Toronto. My, oh my, has it changed since I left after university and after sort of my first gig in the profession. But I loved being back in the city. And, like they say, there's no place like home.
Yes. Oh, I can imagine. And I love that. It sounds like you've built a beautiful life, and especially based on having spent some of that time in Western Canada, it almost makes you appreciate home so much more and what you have here.
Oh my gosh, yeah. There was so much time that I ended up spending, kind of on my own before establishing like a network of friends out west. And it was really interesting because when I first left, a friend of mine actually told me, we weren't really sure you were going to make it. And
Oh,
I,
no.
I kind of understood what they meant because up until then, I was relatively sheltered before I left. So if any of you are considering yourself kind of sheltered before taking the leap, it is possible. Feel free. You can do this. If I can do it, you can do it. And so the first place that I moved to was Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and it's such a lovely community, about 40,000 people in like kind of the more of the northern part of Saskatchewan. And my coverage area was pretty big. It was like central and northern Saskatchewan, lots of different communities to be traveling to, so lots of driving. And my dad actually came up with me to help get me set up. And my dad's been just one of my biggest advocates. He's been such a constant source of support, and I've been really lucky to just have the most awesome girl dad out there. So
Aw.
um, when we went out there, it was funny because he had never really been anywhere significantly smaller than Toronto to live. And he looked at me and he said, "You sure about this?"
Oh, no.
Well, I'm already here, so I don't really think it would be a good idea for me to say, "Hey, I'm not going to stay to
Right?
return to the city." So I, I made myself, just take a deep breath. Yes, it's something new, but the reality is, it's just like starting any new gig. You just happen to be in a different place, but we've all been new, been that new person before. We can all do this. I was new in school. I'm just new to this job and new to this community. So
Mm.
I treated it like that. And I learned how to shoot, how to edit. I drove way more than I ever had in my life because I was going sometimes to communities that would be about, a couple hours north, and then it was a couple hours drive back south to the station. So I did kind of everything, but the one big takeaway from that experience of being away was sometimes you have to get lost to actually get found. And I think that was especially true for me because I was getting lost just about every day.
Oh.
But along the way, I ended up really sort of discovering what I was made of, because I didn't imagine that I would be, going down the highway, getting directions like it's about 2 miles down that way and towards the red sign, and be able to interpret that with ease.
Oh, wow. Oh my goodness. Okay. I'm very shocked because I that scares me.
But sometimes you have to open yourself up to some of the most daunting experiences, the ones at least that seem that way on the surface. But when I went there, honestly, I ended up finding a lot of warmth in my newsroom from my mentors. I have this incredible mentor. He is retired from the industry. Um, but regardless of that, he taught me more than a lot of other people throughout my career and throughout my life, um, in terms of, the gratitude that I have, the level of experience that I had, the willingness to try new things. And he was always really encouraging when I was out there. Um, and because of the kind of kindness and compassion that I received when I was there, I didn't come home right away right after. I ended up moving. I ended up moving to Regina first, to co-anchor a morning show. And then I was morning reporting in Saskatoon, and then I admitted to myself that I was not a morning person. And um, then I ended up moving into dayside and evening news at Global Saskatoon, because I met one of the most incredible people that, she touched my life and my career in such a profound way. And anyone in Canadian broadcasting, or even American broadcasting as well, they probably will have heard of Lisa Ford. And she was the news director at the time at Global Saskatoon, and took a chance on me. And I came over there as the weekend anchor, and it breathed new life into my career and my dreams and my hopes, and restored, kind of my sense of achievement and belonging, because I really wanted to kind of get back to some hard news, telling critical stories, which anyone who works morning news knows, we do have our fair share of critical news, but it's a
Mhm.
little bit lighter. And I was always kind of the person who wanted to do accountability pieces, to, kind of run around and get my answers, do hard hitting interviews, even handle the really hard to get, more emotional interviews. And so, those were things that I was able to do when I moved over to Global Saskatoon. But Lisa Ford just created this environment where you felt like you could, grow personally. You were respected, and everyone was there as a team, and you were there to support your team members. And in an industry where it can be so fiercely competitive, it was refreshing. Um, so she was amazing for me, and I still keep in touch with her. She no longer works for Global Saskatoon, but she does work for a competitor, and I just think the world of her. So I think definitely having those experiences out there, and even moving, I moved even further west. My parents asked me if I needed a compass, because they're like, "Oh, she's gonna come home next." Not
Nope.
quite. Uh, so I ended up moving, to Edmonton as well. But the reality of my whole path is, it wasn't what I had set out to do. It wasn't like there was this blueprint that had been generated, and I was 100% sticking to it. I deviated from it many times, and I think a lot of people are very uncomfortable with the idea of doing that. But the reality is that you definitely deviate whether you want to or not. And that's just learning how to be resourceful times in life. And that is also just being able to bounce back. And I did that a few times. Um, but along the way, I ended up um, I ended up meeting my husband as well. So
That's a
it,
detour too.
it definitely is, because I think, when you're, I can imagine from my parents' perspective, when you're a parent and you want your kid to come home, you want them to come back to Toronto, and they say, "Hi, I've met someone." Um, at first, it's like, okay, they're dating, but then when it's gone on and on, and it's getting serious, I can imagine there was a bit of fear for my parent, right? Like he's in their house.
Absolutely.
So
Oh,
I always joke that my husband is my souvenir from Saskatchewan. So, he's from Yorkton, Saskatchewan. So it's a smaller city, about 20,000 people. But we met in Saskatoon because he was my competition. Um,
no way.
yeah, I worked when we met at the time. I was working for a competing station on a morning news program, and he was working for Global. And we ended up meeting at, I think it was a dragon boat race.
No
And
way.
yeah, it was like a prep for it in the morning. And he was just trying to like outdo me every step of the way. I could totally tell. Like he was like performing really hard. Like he was a reporter for a long, long time. He's now a show producer. And and I just noticed him and I was like, I'm gonna squash him like a bug. And
Oh.
but he was just so nice. And of course, that's the morning that, me in my blue dress, thinking I picked so wisely that morning, I sat in this big pool of water.
Oh no.
And I'm there trying not to let everybody see this giant, like, wet mark because I've just sat in something that I shouldn't have. But anyway, that was how we met. And gradually along the way, we ended up getting out into everybody that we knew because we had tickets to a food and wine festival that we ended up getting through the show. Occasionally, you'll get, the odd little, come to our event. And so we did. We were like, okay, let's just go together and just hang out. So we did that, and then we also had one event. This was a big ticket event at the time, and I may be dating myself mentioning it, but it was the live action version of How to Train Your Dragon.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah, and um, so that definitely didn't leave a lot of room for us to be like, no, we're not seeing each other. So that's more or less my husband and I, Aaron, and we've been together now for, oh goodness, it would be probably close to 12 years.
Wow. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah, so it's been a little while, and yeah, we've got our two fur babies, so
That's
life has been
amazing.
pretty good.
Wow. I love that there's so many different chapters of your life across the country. And it's almost like you gained so much from each one of those chapters. Like you go to Saskatoon and you've got your souvenir Erin and, and working with Lisa Ford and in that environment where she created such an environment where the team could thrive and everyone could grow and everyone could feel like they were part of something is incredible. Like all of these experiences contributed and shaped who you are. And now I love that it resulted in it almost feels like a full circle moment where you've come back and you've had all these experiences and things are good. And now I wonder if we backtrack a little bit
Mhm.
and, we uncover the story of how you decided to pursue the career that you've pursued.
Oh yeah. I mean, this was something that I thought about for a long, long time. I think that
Oh,
sometimes when we are younger, we have these preconceived notions about what we should do, what we're expected to do. Where am I going to make the most money? And anyone who has worked for some measure of time in journalism will tell you we don't do it for the money generally. Um,
oh, okay.
eventually, eventually you do make a lot more. Trust me, you do. But very early on, that's not the case, and you have to really be open to doing that.
Hmm.
But early on, I just knew that I valued connection. I valued being able to meet new people, being able to delve into issues well beyond the surface level. I loved watching the news with my mother and my father. My mom actually consumed so much news. She would sit at the table with four different newspapers in front of her. We would always be watching the evening newscasts, and we wouldn't just watch one. We would actually cycle through all of them on certain nights and kind of look and see how they covered one story and another story. So in a way, my mom was kind of she was the OG newsie in my household. Like she was the one who kind of
Wow.
what with what. And she talked a lot of politics, especially a lot of politics. Um, so for me, she was kind of that person who really started my interest in news. And then it turned into a love when I started consuming a lot of it myself because we had all the newspapers in the house. We had the shows on the TV. We listened to it on the radio. And so obviously now news consumption is very different. It's not primarily consumed over television broadcast. You know, we have streaming services, we have amazing podcasts and documentaries and a number of other ways of being able to get the story. And so for me, I think what really stuck out when I was younger was the whole idea of being able to travel, to adapt, um, and being able to share the stories that we don't often get to hear, to go into communities that maybe are underrepresented and underserved. I really wanted to be able to be a part of that, and I really wanted to make sure that I could at least get out there and feed that kind of passion that I had. And I know that not everybody gets the opportunity to pursue, let alone achieve something that they were dreaming of when they were very young. Um, so that's one of the reasons why I always recognize and I always take a moment um, to really remind myself of just how grateful I am to do what I do.
Hmm.
Um, and so I actually went to my guidance counselor, and this was when I was about 14, going on 15. And I went to him and I just said, I want to go to journalism school. And he immediately gave me a couple of options. I ended up going to TMU and I did the 4 year undergrad, and it was invaluable. I mean, not only because of the fact that you were getting an education in the discipline that you chose, but I also was able to, again, form those connections. And being able to do that, learning on my feet. And what I mean by that is they didn't just teach you out of a textbook. They didn't just, put up slides and you learned theory. It was more practice. So we, for instance, in a radio class and broadcast, we end up getting told to head out the door. Here's your recording machine, and please go and grab as many interviews as you can. Do a profile piece on a perfect stranger.
Wow. Wow. It's so funny. I went to TMU as well, so I can absolutely see this happening.
Yes, yes, but like that kind of experience is the kind of experience that eventually ends up shaping the kind of reporter that you become. It's your willingness to go out there and ask questions that on the surface maybe, oh, maybe that's not an appropriate question. Maybe that's too tough a question. But you learn to gauge all those things. You better your news judgment over time.
Hmm.
And I I really wanted to be able to be one of those storytellers who could take a subject and really invest the time and the energy and get answers beyond what you might be able to get in a day turn too. I do day turn news now, but I love being able to take the time and work ahead on special projects because it takes something that could just be, it could be a story that you do one day and then maybe you follow up another day, and it turns it into something a little bit more investigative, something a little bit more probing. And I think journalism, I fully believe and I'm fully invested in this. Journalism is so incredibly important. In fact, in my mind, more important now than it ever has been. But we obviously, as storytellers, need to be open to adapting, whether that's to new technology, new ways of telling stories, and new ways of engaging with our viewers, our listeners, and being open to some feedback. And I think that's been really important. So getting out there, it's it to answer the question in the longest possible way. It was definitely a matter of being able to really focus on why I loved it so much, which was the connection
Yeah.
and being able to get out there. And I will tell you, when I started off, I mean, there were certain people that I looked up to very much because we didn't necessarily have a great deal of representation except perhaps maybe one station.
Hmm.
I remember thinking to myself, I hope that maybe one day there is a day where, you know, we're going to look up at that screen and, other girls are going to be like, and other young men for that matter are going to look up and be like, you know what? I feel represented. I feel seen. I feel heard. Um, because I think, obviously we still have a bit of a ways to go in some respects, but I think that compared to where we were when I first started consuming news, I'm I feel overjoyed for younger generations because they get to see themselves being represented, and I think in turn when you see yourself represented, it also it gives you a sense of confidence and a feeling that you can pursue something that you want. And
Mhm.
I hope, I truly hope, and I've heard it a couple of times, and believe me, I still think of myself as um, a, a girl from West Toronto who needs to go make her bed. But I've had people who are just so lovely come up and say, it's amazing to see you on television. It's enormously humbling too. I hope and I can only dream that I can, be that for somebody else because it takes a lot of hard work, but you can do it. You can achieve it. It
Mhm.
may not always be easy, but 100%. If you want it, go after it.
That is wonderful. And I think that is such a wonderful example of, recognizing your passion from a young age and having the courage to pursue it. Because, like you said at the beginning, some people are not as lucky to be able to pursue their passion and achieve lifelong dreams. However, that's exactly what I preach here at Driven By, encouraging people to ask the question, what am I driven by? What is my passion? And can I reorient my life around what that is? Because I think those things get lost as we're growing up. We kind of have this inkling towards a passion or a dream, and then reality kicks in or society kicks in to say, well, that's not necessarily a stable or realistic job. So perhaps you should pick something else.
With
And
benefits.
right, with benefits
Yeah.
and a pension, right?
Yep, yep. I mean, I heard that before too. And I mean, obviously, I mean, with a full-time job, even in journalism, yes, you still get your benefits, you still contribute towards your pension. But at the same time, um, we we definitely, when you start off, there is a risk factor, especially if you're moving away because you're on your own. You're not making a ton of money. I hate to break it to anyone who thought that that was the first thing that you get out of the gates. You absolutely do not. Full
Good to
disclosure,
know.
well, I'll say it. Yeah, I mean, because I have no qualms about saying this, but when I left, my first gig was probably in the ballpark of about 30, 31 grand.
Oh, wow.
And I have to say, like, that wasn't uncommon. A lot of friends that I had, and I hope that's me remembering correctly, but a lot of my friends similarly were, in and around that amount of money as well too with their first journalism job. So it's not what it's not what a lot of people envision as far as this whole glamorous portrayal of journalism, but you know, when there are certain professions that your parents might be geared towards, they might say, this one has more stability in it. Absolutely. I got told that a few times. I come from a family with, some teachers in there, zero journalists whatsoever. And so when I said that I wanted to be a journalist, it didn't necessarily go over great the first time. Um, but I think over time, my father, I'll say my father first, because I think my mother was a little bit more, she took more convincing. At first, my father, he was the one who really had to do the convincing with my mother. He started to just see how happy it made me to pursue journalism, to
Ah.
pursue something that I loved. And he told me at the end of the day, I just want you to live your best life. I want you to be happy. I want you to not have any regrets about what you've pursued.
Yeah.
And we often get so scared of, you know, what our parents might think, what our parents might say. And we worry that they're not going to support our decision at the end of the day. And the truth is, and not maybe not all situations, but for me, I realized that what was more important to my dad was just making sure that I could wake up every morning and feel good about my choices and feel good about what I had pursued because it was genuinely something that I wanted to do and that I loved.
That's
And
amazing.
so it is he's my dad is one of those people who, when I was very, very young, always told me, and that's my coaster. I'm a coffee addict. Um, background. Um, but my dad always used to say, if you want it, you can achieve it. And he would also say, don't depend on a man for anything, go get it yourself.
Yes.
and, and I took that to heart. I always believed, if I was going to get it, I was going to get it for myself. And if I met somebody along the way, then
Right.
and that has that has been, enormously empowering. And I was lucky enough to have that growing up. But not everybody does. Um, but I think, when you consider just the power of your words as a mentor or as a parent or as an aunt or an uncle, the reality is your words can serve as such a guide, such a source of motivation for somebody. And you don't know, it could be a time when they really need it most. And so I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in what we're doing in our careers. And very often in this job, sometimes you do have to compartmentalize a little bit. Um, some stories are tougher than others, but they're very all consuming. And so
Hmm.
a lot of things take a back seat. So achieving something like balance can be really hard.
Hmm.
Um, but I think the thing that I'm reminding myself is the value of words and my time. And I've sort of made it more of a priority to give of myself the way that a lot of people gave to me in mentoring and giving advice, in giving their time and giving their feedback because it wasn't something that I felt like I was getting initially, and I needed that to grow.
Absolutely.
And if you want the feedback, if you need the feedback, I always tell people go and get it. And if there's somebody who inspires you, don't feel intimidated about reaching out because they had someone they reached out to once upon a time. And that someone may have changed their lives, and you don't know. Their reaction could be very different from what you're envisioning in your head at the moment.
Exactly. You never know until you try and reach out, and those small moments where you take a chance and reach out could change everything. And I love how you said that, some of the words that we speak have the ability to change lives and create motivation. So I have a question for you, and
Mhm.
I want to know you because it sounds like you've had some incredible mentors on your journey that have really contributed to, your mindset and feeling empowered. Now, was there a time where you felt like you didn't have motivation, and how did you get through that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I can tell you that when I was when I was in a couple of points actually, getting back to Toronto wasn't something that was easy by any stretch of the imagination. I really had to work towards it. I ended up going Prince Albert, Regina, Saskatoon, Edmonton, and then back. So it took about 6.5 years in total to get back home. And for a little while, I had sort of placed an expectation on myself that I would get back within a certain time frame. And when I wasn't making it back within that time frame, I started to feel just enormously dejected that there was no way that I was ever going to get home.
Ah.
And and even though, I may come across as very mentally and emotionally strong now, and I am, and I was then. I had my moments. I had my moments of self-doubt. I had my moments where I would look at my husband and I would say, "What's going on?" Like,
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
looking at my body of work and I think it's good. Why is it not sticking? Why is this not happening? And
Right.
along the way, when I had said goodbye to my parents, when I left, I always sort of envisioned calling them up and saying, I'm coming back, and getting back and having kind of that celebratory, breakfast with my parents out. Like, we used to love going to breakfast. And so I
Oh,
envisioned that that was something that we would do. And it became really painful in about 2016, 2017. We had a couple of deaths in my family within about 11 months of each other.
oh my goodness.
It was really hard to be away at that time because I sort of I could see what my dad was enduring, and one was my brother and the other was my mother.
Oh my
And
gosh.
my mom, she had been dealing with vascular dementia, and a lot had changed by the time that my husband and I got married. She she was different, certainly at the wedding. She's still my mother, still the woman that I loved and still love very much. But at that time, it was difficult because I was so far away and I wasn't there to help. And I definitely felt like I could and should have been doing more. Was I being a good daughter, being far away, pursuing my dreams, and then at the same time feeling dejected that I couldn't get back yet? Um, so it was that moment in my life where, unfortunately, in 2017 in the spring, my mother did pass away after her battle with vascular dementia, complications due to dementia. Um,
I am so
and
sorry, by the way.
I appreciate that. Thank you. She, when she passed, it became even more difficult for me. And I will tell you that one of the things that I am the most grateful for in this world is the friendships and the support and just the people, the good people that we've met. Because when we came back on one of those trips, I will never forget what my colleagues and my friends did in Edmonton at Global Edmonton. They actually um, they pooled together funds for my husband and I because we had been spending so much money um, to basically fly back and forth between Edmonton and Toronto.
Mhm.
And we came back and we had this amazing, amazing card, and we had this pooled together fund for us, which I was not expecting. But through the generosity and the compassion of our whole newsroom, it was a gesture. It was something that I never forgot. But more than that, it was the people who came up and had words of advice. One of them, actually, who I remember very clearly, um, had suffered his own loss while living away from home as well. Um, he shared how he got through that with me, and I had the types of colleagues who just were there to reassure, to make sure that I knew that I was supported in every way possible, and that my husband was supported in every way possible, and my my news director at the time as well, who gave us the time to really process what was happening. You never truly realize how much it's going to mean to you until those moments happen. And I I realized that at that point, that we were loved and we were supported. I knew it in some level for sure, but it was even more it was just even more evident in the way that people really banded around us at that
Mhm.
time. And
Right.
eventually I actually did get an opportunity to come home, but the way that this happened was um, the timing was very the timing was, to many people when they hear it, their first reaction is that is just really incredible timing or strange timing. When I came home for my mother's funeral after she had passed, my dad and I just sort of we had a conversation, and he said, "I'm going to call you when things are really dire, and I need you to come back." And he called me. It was shortly before I was doing the evening newscast in Edmonton, so it was about half an hour to air, and I got that call. So I talked to him. I I was obviously beside myself, but at the same time, I had a newscast to do in about 25 minutes after that conversation.
Wow.
So I went on the air. I went on the air again later that night at 11. And then I went home, and my husband was already in the process of booking me a flight back to Toronto. And I just remember that, you know, as much as you compartmentalize, you have to be willing to open up and lean on somebody at some point. It doesn't make you less than, it doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. And
Mm.
that's okay. And uh, when I was in Toronto, I ended up getting a call about doing an interview for a position um, at Global Toronto. And
Wow.
the day after the funeral, I went in after a long discussion with my dad, asking him, "What do you think? Is this really the right time?" And he said, "Well, why not?"
Wow.
Went in the day after the funeral, and uh, I interviewed for the job that I have now. And I ended up accepting the job that I have now, incidentally, on my brother's birthday.
Whoa.
So the timing is was sort of all over the place, and I didn't expect any of it to happen. Certainly at the time that it did, um, but I felt very much like
You're
maybe it was meant to be at
supported.
the moment.
Yeah. It was like you were universally supported. You were supported by your team out in Edmonton. You were supported by your family. And although it was such a difficult time, it's like they cushioned it. They softened what was going on. And it was just the coming together of all of those things got you through. Like that was a very difficult time. And I'm hearing this, I'm like, wow, I could
It
feel
was.
the emotion. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh my
It's,
goodness.
I mean, and those times can be made even harder if you don't have, the support system that we did. And I'll always be grateful. And it doesn't matter where I go or what I'm doing. I always talk about the family that we've been so lucky to say that we had all across
Mhm.
this country. And that Global Edmonton team that we had at the time always holds a very special place in my heart because they were there at such an important moment in my life and such an important moment in um, even in my career, but mostly just in my life. It I don't forget them, and I obviously I can't smile during every live hit because some stories are not smile appropriate. But
Mhm. Mhm.
whenever I'm told that I have a live hit to do with the team over in Global Edmonton, I do definitely have a special smile on my face every time someone mentions that I'm going to be talking to them later or when I hear the control room because I just love them so much and they meant a lot to me and they still do and I hope that they know that.
Oh, that is wonderful. I am so glad that you had such a great support system, and I know we got really deep there, and thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing that story with us. Like that's amazing, and I think there's somebody out there who can relate to that, and just knowing that leaning on that support system is okay, and one day things will be better. One day things will be okay, and you'll be able to talk about it, and you'll be able to continue on in pursuing your passion. And so, I mean, my next question is a little bit lighter,
Mhm.
but it is the question that I ask everyone. and I alluded to it earlier, but it is Shallima, what are you driven by?
I am driven by a few things. And I'm not going to lie to you. I had to write this in a journal as well because I think we were talking about it even before we had this conversation. And it is simply that I think a lot of us have a really hard time sort of answering, what we're driven by or who we are, because a lot of the time we find ourselves just so very tethered to our professional lives. And so we think of
Mhm.
ourselves in that capacity. But for me, I have always been driven by being able to represent a community that I don't see actually represented a lot. And
Mhm.
that is my own community as well. I am part of a diaspora community. My family is Indo-Caribbean. Um, I've always believed in being able to, you know, shoot for the stars and just I also am a huge fan of the underdog. And so I I think maybe to some extent I sort of saw myself as that very early on. And I really wanted to push forward and channel all the strength that I had to do that. Um, but I think more so now, I'm just driven by a need to make sure that people who aren't normally heard, stories that may not have gotten the attention that they did before, do. I have this platform and I'm so lucky to have it, but I want to use it for good. We have an ability to do that and to share stories now on a much wider scale. And if there is any opportunity to do that, it's what I want to harness. And I have a voice, I have a willingness to use it. Um, and I don't know if you've noticed, a very talkative, outgoing personality. so, so I want to make sure that I'm there to help shed light on issues that need to be attention. So I am driven by a need to help do better, to make the world around me a good place, a better place. And I remember a mentor of mine saying this about the newsroom environment, that he wanted to leave it in a better shape than it was when he found it. And I feel like maybe that should be all of our goals when it comes to the world around us. I want to leave it in a better state than the way that we found it. I want
Yes.
to make sure that I have that kind of impact. And if you remember nothing about me individually, I just want you to remember that something good happened, that something, changed someone's life. And I think that is what I'm more so driven by, because I think things change from time to time, period to period in your life. And I 100% found that, as I've gotten older, my priorities have also changed. It's not just pursuing the career goals, but making sure that the mark that I leave is not, I'm not just seeking to leave some indelible mark. I want to leave a mark on society that, changes it for the better, that makes people question things that they should question, makes them ask more probing questions, and makes them braver, makes them stronger. So those are the things for me that mean the most. And if there is a way for me to make that possible, whether through my profession or just through my voice, um, I think that's really important.
What an extraordinary legacy. I love that. And so I would say my final question, based on your story and your experience and everything that you went through and your mission to help others and lift those voices, what is a piece of advice that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Don't be afraid to get lost. Don't be afraid to take a chance. You may feel like something is far beyond your reach, that the experience is so different from anything that you've known that you're not going to make it. But at the end of the day, you can do a lot more than you think you're capable of. And I learned it firsthand. I learned it getting lost on backcountry roads. I learned it when I, I had to be resourceful after driving around for, 5 hours trying to find a location, I was able, I always, I definitely, I had those moments where I didn't know if I could do it. But self-doubt does not mean that you should give up.
Yes.
Self-doubt is normal. Questioning yourself is normal. But at the end of the day, the thing that I did that I will always remember and always treasure these memories is turning up the music, turning down the volume of my doubt and my anxieties and my paranoia, and thinking about what I wanted to accomplish at that moment. I made sure that I allowed my voice to be louder than my doubts. And I think that that is the most important thing for people to remember. You need to have faith in yourself before anyone else is going to be willing to invest their faith in you.
Yeah.
And if you can if you can envision yourself achieving something, that is the first step. Envision it. See yourself, whether it's holding a microphone and doing my job, see yourself doing it.
Mhm.
Or, see yourself becoming a teacher or a judge, whatever it is, you can accomplish it. Even if a journey is not easy or it doesn't seem like it's going to be easy. I mean, everything usually worth having, it does have challenges attached to it. It is still 100% worth doing. You can do this, but again, don't be afraid to get lost in order to get found.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I also love the line where it's like, you have to have faith in yourself before someone will invest their faith into you. Those are beautiful lines to leave our audience with. And, but Shalima, I have to thank you so much for joining us on the podcast and sharing your story and sharing the lessons that I think have the ability to transform somebody's mindset for the better. So I love that we're tapping into your mission and just through your story alone, making those changes in the world and making it a better place. So if people want to get connected with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. I am all over social media. So you can find me over at X. I'm at Shallima Maharaj. And then I am also on Instagram too. So you can find me there. And yeah, I'm over at Global News as well. So if you want to email me, you can also do so. My profile is online at globalnews.ca/Toronto.
Wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to the What Are You Driven By podcast. We hope to see you next time for another life changing motivational story.